A dark secret slithered through Florence's alleys for centuries. It was not about poison or hidden treasure, but about bricks, marble, and a power so vast it reshaped an entire city. The Medici family, bankers turned rulers, built an empire not just with money, but with stone. They did not just build buildings, they built monuments to their own unstoppable ambition. These were not just homes or churches, they were statements, declarations carved in Tuscan rock, whispering tales of incredible wealth and iron will. Get ready to uncover the most audacious construction projects that changed Florence forever, because the Medici were not playing small when it came to making their mark on the world. Number 5. The Vasari Corridor. Picture this Florence in the mid-1500s. The powerful Medici Duke, Cosimo I de' Medici, lived across the Arno River in the massive Pitti Palace. His offices, the Uffizi, were on the other side. Everyday life for a duke involved parades, public appearances, and constant security threats, but Cosimo had a truly wild idea. What if he could walk from his bedroom straight to his office, all without touching the ground or being seen by a single commoner? This was not just a duke wanting convenience, this was a duke wanting absolute control and privacy in a city still simmering with old rivalries. The solution was the Vasari Corridor, an elevated, enclosed passageway spanning over 1 kilometer, defying logic and gravity. Giorgio Vasari, the Medici's go-to architect and artist, received the order in 1565. The occasion was the wedding of Cosimo's son, Francesco, to Joanna of Austria. The city needed to be spruced up, and this corridor was to be the ultimate show of Medici might and ingenuity. Vasari, known for his speed and efficiency, was tasked with completing this monumental structure in just 5 months. 5 months. That is less than half a year to build a private highway through the heart of one of Europe's most vibrant cities. It sounded impossible, but the Medici had an unlimited budget and an unshakable will. The corridor began at the Palazzo Vecchio, which was once the seat of Florentine government and later connected to the Uffizi. From there, it snaked its way across the Ponte Vecchio, Florence's oldest bridge, and then continued along the Arno River, finally arriving at the Pitti Palace. It was a bizarre, almost alien structure, clinging to buildings, cutting through towers, and even forcing a church to modify its design. One of the most famous parts of the corridor is its passage over the Ponte Vecchio. Before the corridor, butchers and tanners had their shops lining the bridge, creating a foul-smelling, noisy thoroughfare. Cosimo, a man who preferred not to hold his nose on his morning commute, had them all evicted. In their place, elegant goldsmith shops were installed. The Vasari Corridor ran right on top of these new shops, its windows offering stunning, exclusive views of the Arno River. The corridor's path was not straightforward. It had to navigate through existing structures, and Vasari was ingenious in his solutions. It passed through the Church of Santa Felicita, where a special unnoticeable balcony was built so the Medici could attend Mass without being seen by the common worshippers below. It was a clear demonstration of their divine right and separation from the public. The corridor also had to cross streets and alleyways, often doing so with sturdy arches or by integrating into existing buildings. This meant that some private homes and businesses had to be literally built around, or even had their upper floors incorporated into the corridor itself. Imagine having a duke's private walkway running through your attic. It was an incredible disruption, but no one dared to question the Medici. Inside, the Vasari Corridor was not just a bare tunnel. It was a private gallery designed to be filled with the Medici family's personal art collection. Hundreds of paintings, many of them self-portraits of famous artists, hung on its walls. It was a walk through art history, a very exclusive museum for the ducal family and their most esteemed guests. The windows, especially those overlooking the Arno, were strategically placed to offer breathtaking vistas of the city, allowing the Medici to observe their domain from a privileged, unreachable vantage point. They could watch the city go about its daily life, but they remained unseen, a true symbol of their absolute power. The construction process was relentless. Hundreds of laborers worked day and night, hauling stone, mixing mortar, and raising scaffolding. Vasari himself oversaw every detail, pushing his teams to meet the insane deadline. The corridor had to be structurally sound, aesthetically pleasing, and absolutely secure. The speed of its construction was a testament to the Medici's financial muscle and Vasari's organizational genius. It was a project that could easily have taken years, but it was forced into existence in a mere matter of months. The Vasari Corridor was more than just a convenience. It was a psychological weapon. It projected an image of absolute, untouchable authority. The Duke did not need to mingle with the masses. He glided above them, a phantom ruler surveying his kingdom. It reinforced the idea that the Medici were separate, elevated, and beyond the ordinary concerns of their subjects. It was a literal manifestation of their status as absolute rulers of Florence. Even today, walking through the corridor, if you are lucky enough to get a special tour, you can feel that sense of separation, that exclusive access to the city's heart, a feeling that no other building in Florence quite provides. It remains a testament to a family that saw the world through a unique lens, where even a simple walk to work could become an act of monumental power and ambition. Number 4, the Uffizi Gallery. Imagine Florence in the mid-1500s. The Medici Grand Duke, Cosimo I de' Medici, was not just a patron of the arts, he was a meticulous ruler who wanted every aspect of his government to run like a well-oiled machine. His administration was growing, paperwork was piling up, and he needed a single, centralized location for all his judicial and administrative offices. He wanted to consolidate the power that spread across many different buildings. This was not a desire for a pretty building. This was a need for a functional, imposing symbol of his absolute authority. His chosen architect for this grand project was, once again, Giorgio Vasari. The site Cosimo chose was a narrow strip of land between the Palazzo della Signoria, the old government palace, and the Arno River. It was a crowded, somewhat unsightly area, but it offered strategic advantages. The plan was to create a massive U-shaped complex that would house all the state offices, known as the Uffizi, which literally means offices. This building was not merely functional, it was designed to be a showcase of Medici power and a monument to orderly governance. It was to be a fortress of bureaucracy, an elegant machine of statecraft. Vasari started work on the Uffizi in 1560. The scale of the project was immense. It involved demolishing existing structures, clearing the land, and then building an entirely new, imposing complex from the ground up. The design was revolutionary for its time. Vasari created a harmonious architectural ensemble with long, narrow courtyards that stretched towards the river. The building featured a regular rhythm of columns and arches, giving it a sense of classical order and grandeur. It was designed to impress, but also to facilitate the efficient functioning of the state. The Uffizi was originally meant to house the 13 most important Florentine magistrates, including the guild corporations, merchants' tribunals, and the state archives. Each office had its own space, with ample light and air, something unusual for government buildings of that era. Vasari incorporated clever design elements, such as loggias on the upper floors that offered panoramic views of the Arno and the city. These loggias, open on one side, provided light and ventilation to the rooms, a crucial feature for the hot Tuscan summers. The construction was a multi-decade affair. Vasari worked tirelessly on the Uffizi until his death in 1574, but the building was far from complete. It was continued by other prominent architects, including Bernardo Buontalenti and Alfonso Parigi the Elder, who largely followed Vasari's original design but also added their own touches. The famous octagonal tribuna, for example, a dazzling room designed to house the most precious Medici art treasures, was a later addition by Buontalenti, completed around 1584. As the Uffizi progressed, its purpose began to subtly shift. While it remained a working government building, the Medici, particularly Francesco I, Cosimo's son, started to use its upper floors to display their increasingly vast and spectacular art collections. The family had always been passionate collectors, but now they had a purpose-built space to showcase their treasures. The long corridors and spacious rooms were ideal for displaying paintings, sculptures, and precious objects, transforming parts of the Uffizi into a proto-museum long before the concept of public museums existed. This was a private display of wealth and taste, but it was also a public statement about the Medici's cultural dominance. The process of constructing the Uffizi was not without its challenges. Moving the enormous quantities of stone, timber, and other materials through a crowded Renaissance city was a logistical nightmare. Thousands of workers were employed, from skilled masons and carpenters to simple laborers. The costs were astronomical, but the Medici treasury seemed endless, fueled by their banking empire and the revenues of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. The Uffizi became a massive economic engine, employing a significant portion of Florence's workforce for decades. One of the most striking features of the Uffizi is its integration with the Vasari Corridor, which we just explored. This connection solidified the Uffizi status as a key hub of Medici power. The corridor allowed the Duke to move directly from his residential palace to his administrative center, bypassing the streets below, maintaining both security and a symbolic distance from his subjects. The Uffizi was not just a workplace, it was part of an elaborate network of power and privilege. The Uffizi, even in its unfinished state during the Medici era, served its purpose as a central government building. But it also laid the groundwork for what it would become centuries later, one of the world's most famous art museums. The Medici's decision to display their collections within its walls was a far-sighted act, though they likely never envisioned millions of tourists flocking to it every year. It was a building that embodied the Medici's blend of pragmatism and prestige, a monument to their administrative power and their insatiable desire to collect and display beauty, forever cementing their legacy in the heart of Florence. Number 3, Pitti Palace and Boboli Gardens. The story of the Pitti Palace begins not with the Medici, but with a rival Florentine banking family, the Pitti, in the mid-1400s. Luca Pitti, a wealthy merchant, wanted to build a palace that would outshine even the Medici's own grand residence. Legend says he demanded a courtyard large enough to hold the entire Medici palace within it. He commissioned Filippo Brunelleschi, the genius who built Florence Cathedral's dome, to design his colossal home, though Brunelleschi likely only provided initial ideas and died before much construction began. It was a massive undertaking, built with rough-hewn stone blocks, giving it a powerful, almost forbidding appearance. But the Pitti family ran into financial trouble, and the palace remained unfinished, a grand shell of an ambition. Fast forward a century. The Medici were no longer just powerful bankers. They were Grand Dukes of Tuscany, and their power had grown exponentially. In 1549, Eleonora di Toledo, the wife of Cosimo I de' Medici, purchased the Pitti Palace. She wanted a healthier, more spacious environment for her large family, far from the bustling, sometimes disease-ridden center of Florence. The Pitti Palace, located on the Oltrarno side of the river and backed by the Boboli Hill, offered exactly that: fresh air, expansive views, and ample space for expansion. This acquisition was a major turning point. The palace, once a symbol of a rival's failed ambition, would become the Medici's primary residence, transformed into a sprawling ducal court. Cosimo and Eleonora immediately set about transforming the unfinished palace into a truly magnificent residence. They hired Bartolomeo Ammanati to oversee the massive expansion. Aminotti added the imposing central courtyard, creating a grand inner space that truly dwarfs most other Florentine palaces. He also added 2 large wings, extending the palace's facade and making it even more imposing. The work involved quarrying enormous amounts of stone, hiring hundreds of masons and laborers, and an unimaginable budget. The palace grew layer by layer, wing by wing, becoming a colossal edifice that dwarfed almost every other structure in the city. It was not just a home, it was a small city in itself, housing the ducal family, their court, servants, and even soldiers. But the true genius of the Pitti Palace lies not just in its immense scale, but in the sprawling, magnificent Boboli gardens that rise behind it. Eleonora's vision was not just for a palace, but for a vast private park that would serve as a grand outdoor theater for the ducal court. Niccolo Tribolo was the first landscape architect commissioned to design the gardens, starting in 1550. When he died, Aminotti and later Bernardo Buontalenti continued the work, transforming a rugged hillside into one of Europe's earliest and most influential Italian gardens. The Boboli Gardens were a project of unbelievable ambition and engineering. The hillside itself had to be sculpted, terraced, and irrigated. Water was a major challenge in a hill garden. An aqueduct called the Vasari Aqueduct had to be built to bring water from nearby hills to feed the numerous fountains, grottos, and water features that would populate the gardens. This was a massive infrastructure project in itself, demonstrating the Medici's ability to bend nature to their will. The gardens were designed as an open-air museum and entertainment space. They featured a complex network of pathways, groves, classical statues, grottos, and fountains. The Grand Grotto, designed by Buontalenti, is a masterpiece of Mannerist architecture, featuring artificial stalactites, sponges, and sculptures that create a truly surreal, otherworldly environment. It was a place for secret meetings, for displaying precious art, and for grand theatrical performances. The amphitheater carved into the hillside was used for elaborate court spectacles and plays, where the Medici could entertain their guests on a truly grand scale. Every element of the Boboli Gardens was carefully planned to create a dramatic and symbolic experience. The central axis leads from the palace up to the Fountain of Neptune, offering breathtaking views of Florence. The Egyptian obelisk brought from Rome adds an exotic touch. The statues of mythological figures and ancient gods populated the groves, turning the gardens into a living landscape of classical learning and allegory. It was a garden designed not just for beauty, but for intellectual stimulation and as a setting for the rituals of ducal power. The Pitti Palace and Boboli Gardens together represented the pinnacle of Medici grandeur. It was a private world, a haven for the ducal family, but also a carefully crafted stage for displaying their power, wealth, and sophisticated taste to visiting dignitaries and rival rulers. The sheer scale of the project, spanning decades and involving countless artists, engineers, and laborers, showcased the inexhaustible resources and unyielding will of the Medici. They transformed a single unfinished palace and a rugged hillside into a sprawling complex that became the heart of their ducal reign, a testament to their ambition to live like emperors and leave a legacy that would echo for centuries. Number 2, Basilica of San Lorenzo complex. The Basilica of San Lorenzo was not just a church, it was the Medici family's parish church, their spiritual home, and later, their grand mausoleum. Its transformation from a simple, modest church into a monumental complex stretching over centuries is a powerful story of Medici ambition, piety, and an obsession with eternal legacy. This project started with Cosimo the Elder, the patriarch of the Medici dynasty, and was completed by his descendants, including the popes and grand dukes, making it one of the most enduring testaments to Medici power. The story began in the early 1400s when Cosimo de' Medici decided to rebuild the old, crumbling Romanesque church of San Lorenzo. He envisioned a new, grander structure that would reflect his family's growing prestige, even though they were still technically just wealthy bankers. He entrusted the design to Filippo Brunelleschi, the visionary architect who had just completed the Dome of Florence Cathedral. Brunelleschi's design for San Lorenzo was groundbreaking. He moved away from the Gothic style that dominated Europe and embraced a more classical, harmonious approach, drawing inspiration from ancient Roman architecture. He used a modular system based on mathematical proportions, creating a space of serene beauty and perfect balance. The construction of the main basilica was a long and arduous process, spanning several decades and often facing financial difficulties despite the Medici's wealth. Building a structure of this size required enormous resources, stone from distant quarries, timber, and the skilled labor of hundreds of masons, carpenters, and artisans. The project was so important to Cosimo that he personally oversaw many aspects, showing his dedication to this sacred family project. He viewed it as a way to honor God and also to secure his family's place in history. Within the basilica, two sections stand out as particularly ambitious and iconic: the old sacristy and the new sacristy. The old sacristy, designed by Brunelleschi and decorated by Donatello, was completed in the 1420s. It served as the burial place for several early Medici family members, including Cosimo's parents. It is a masterpiece of early Renaissance architecture, with its perfect geometric forms and elegant decorations, setting the tone for the rest of the basilica. It was a clear statement that the Medici intended to be buried among the city's most distinguished citizens even before they held official political power. Centuries later, the Medici's ambition for San Lorenzo soared to new heights. Pope Leo X and Pope Clement VII, both Medici popes, commissioned Michelangelo to design the new sacristy, intended as a more prominent burial chapel for members of the ducal branch of the family. Michelangelo began work in 1520, and his design was a revolutionary blend of architecture and sculpture. He created dynamic, expressive figures of dukes Lorenzo and Giuliano resting on their sarcophagi, with allegorical figures of night, day, dawn, and dusk guarding their tombs. The new sacristy is a dark, brooding, yet powerfully emotional space designed to evoke deep contemplation on life and death. And Michelangelo spent years meticulously carving the marble, overseeing every detail of the chapel, making it a truly personal and monumental work. But the Medici's ultimate statement of eternal power came in the 17th century with the construction of the chapels of the princes, an enormous octagonal mausoleum attached to the basilica. This project began in 1604 under Grand Duke Ferdinando I and continued for centuries, only being finished in the 19th century. It was an unprecedented undertaking, designed to house the remains of all the Grand Dukes of Tuscany. The chapel's interior is covered in incredibly expensive marble inlay, using precious stones like lapis lazuli, mother of pearl, and various kinds of jasper. Thousands upon thousands of intricately cut pieces of stone were meticulously fitted together to create dazzling patterns and heraldic crests. It was a project of unimaginable cost and labor, demonstrating the Medici's belief in their own semi-divine status and their desire for an eternal, lavish resting place. The chapels of the princes involved an entire workshop, the Opificio delle Pietre Dure, dedicated solely to this highly specialized and time-consuming art of Commesso Fiorentino, or Florentine mosaic. It was a project that consumed generations of artisans and millions of ducats. The dome, originally planned to be decorated with lapis lazuli, was eventually frescoed due to the sheer cost and difficulty of obtaining enough of the precious blue stone. The chapel remains unfinished in some parts, a testament to its overwhelming scale and the sheer ambition of the family that conceived it. Finally, within the San Lorenzo complex is the Laurentian Library, another masterpiece by Michelangelo commissioned by Pope Clement VII, another Medici. This library was designed to house the vast collection of books and manuscripts accumulated by the Medici family over generations. Michelangelo's design for the library, begun in 1524, was radical and innovative. He designed a monumental staircase that seems to pour down into the reading room, creating a sense of dramatic compression and release. The reading room itself is a long, elegant space with rows of finely carved wooden desks where scholars could study the precious texts. The library was not just a storage space, it was a carefully designed intellectual environment reflecting the Medici's deep commitment to learning and humanism. The Basilica of San Lorenzo, with its additions, is a living history of the Medici. From Brunelleschi's elegant Renaissance church to Michelangelo's powerful chapels and library, to the dizzying opulence of the chapels of the princes, it embodies the family's unwavering ambition to build a lasting legacy, both spiritual and temporal. It is a complex that truly shows the evolution of Medici power and taste across centuries, from wealthy patrons to absolute rulers, always with an eye on eternal remembrance. Number 1. Palazzo Medici Riccardi. Every dynasty needs a home, a central hub that declares its power to the world. For the Medici, that home was the Palazzo Medici, later known as Palazzo Medici Riccardi. This was not just a house. It was the first grand palace built by a private citizen in Florence, a monumental statement of wealth, influence, and unshakable ambition. When Cosimo the Elder, the shrewd banker who truly launched the Medici family's ascent, decided to build it in the mid-1400s, Florence was still a republic, at least in name. Cosimo had to tread carefully, projecting power without appearing too arrogant or inviting too much envy. The palace he commissioned Michelozzo di Bartolomeo to design struck this delicate balance. The Palazzo Medici began construction in 1444, an era when Florence was still rebuilding after years of political turmoil and plague. Cosimo's choice of Michelozzo was strategic. While Brunelleschi was a greater genius, his proposed design for the palace might have been too grand, too ostentatious, potentially provoking the Florentine populace. Michelozzo's design was impressive, but also had a subtle, understated elegance that initially masked its immense scale and cost. It was a masterpiece of political architecture, appearing respectable yet immensely powerful. The palace is built around a central courtyard, a typical feature of Florentine palaces, but Michelozzo elevated it to a new level. The exterior is famous for its 3 distinct levels of rustication, each conveying a different sense of strength and elegance. The ground floor, facing the street, uses heavy, rough-hewn stone blocks, giving it a fortress-like appearance, a symbol of security and invulnerability. This was important in a city where political rivals often settled scores in the streets. The middle floor features smoother, more refined blocks, while the top floor is made of perfectly smooth ashlar, creating a sense of increasing refinement as the building rises. This progression from rough to smooth was a subtle visual cue about the Medici's ascent, from humble origins to refined power. The palace's footprint was enormous, encompassing an entire city block. It devoured a significant portion of Florence's real estate. Inside, the central courtyard is a marvel of Renaissance design, with an open loggia that creates a sense of light and spaciousness. It was a place for family gatherings, for receiving important guests, and for displaying the family's growing collection of ancient sculptures and art. The courtyard was a semi-public space, allowing a controlled glimpse into the Medici's private world. The interior of the palace was just as ambitious. The Medici family lived on the upper floors, while the ground floor housed their bank, workshops, and offices. This was not just a home, it was the nerve center of their vast banking empire and their political operations. The palace contained numerous rooms, chapels, and halls, all decorated with the finest materials and commissioned artworks. The Chapel of the Magi, frescoed by Benozzo Gozzoli, is perhaps the most famous example. It depicts the journey of the Magi, but cleverly incorporates portraits of Medici family members and their allies, making it a subtle yet powerful piece of political propaganda disguised as religious art. It was a private chapel for family devotion, but it was also a dazzling display of wealth and connections, a space used to impress visiting dignitaries. The construction of the Palazzo Medici was an incredible undertaking. It required vast quantities of stone, timber, and other materials, all hauled by ox cart and barge from distant quarries and forests. Hundreds of skilled masons, carpenters, and laborers worked for years to bring Michelozzo's vision to life. The cost was astronomical, estimated to be over 60,000 florins, a colossal sum at the time, equivalent to tens of millions of modern dollars. But for Cosimo, it was a worthwhile investment. It was a tangible symbol of his family's stability, wealth, and permanence. It was a statement that the Medici were here to stay. The Palazzo Medici became the archetype for later Renaissance palaces throughout Italy. Its design influenced countless other wealthy families and rulers who sought to emulate the Medici's blend of power and sophistication. It was a place where Cosimo the Elder entertained popes, kings, and scholars, where he nurtured artists like Donatello and Botticelli, and where he quietly pulled the strings of Florentine politics. It was the backdrop for generations of Medici life, from births and marriages to political intrigues and deaths. This palace was not just a building, it was the physical embodiment of the Medici's rise from obscure merchants to unofficial rulers of Florence. It represented their vision for a new kind of power, one based not just on brute force, but on economic might, cultural patronage, and shrewd political maneuvering. It was a private home that served a very public purpose, a subtle yet overwhelming declaration that the Medici had arrived, and they intended to reshape the world around them, one magnificent stone at a time. The Palazzo Medici Riccardi stands today as a testament to that initial daring ambition that set the stage for all the magnificent projects that followed.